Hi everyone, so Abattoir of Zir has been out for 3 weeks now or so. I've been playing it quite a lot lately with different classes and different builds, and I think I have a pretty good grasp of everything there is about it, basically. And, well, Abattoir of Zir has not really been received all too well as far as I can tell. A lot of people were not really interested in trying it out. And while I do recognize that it was intended to be an extremely high-end challenge for the blasters and not really like for the overall, like casual audience or something like that, I think there was probably too little participation, even from this like target group of blasters. So I want to explore why that is and give feedback to Blizzard, give feedback to the devs for them to do it better in the future. So let's start with my list here. So I made a little list of points that I want to go through in this video, and I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. I've talked about some of these points already and in the past, and generally my opinion has not really changed. But let's just get into it, starting with the difficulty. So obviously one of the reasons why Abattoir of Zir is extremely unpopular is because it starts at a very high difficulty. Shortly after the launch of Abattoir, Blizzard has done a massive nerf on the first 9 tiers of Abattoir of Zir, and they also nerfed monster damage by 20% across the board, which actually did help quite a lot to allow more builds to push higher, make more greedy setups, and just like especially help out the casuals that might just die too easily. So that was actually a really good change. However, it came too late, and I think a lot of people had already given up on it before that patch happened. And even though that only took a few days, that was it basically for many people. And in general, the scaling is still extremely harsh when you go to the higher tiers. So basically what happens is when you go to higher tiers, monsters become more and more tanky, and at the first few tiers they also get higher monster levels. So I think it starts out at like monster level 140 or something, and then it goes really quickly to like level 154, which is the same as tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons. And then it goes slowly up from there to like 158 or 159 or something like that. But the thing is that not only do the monsters level scale, but also their health in very weird ways. So I want to show this here very quick. So this is the HP growth graph, basically dependent from one tier to the previous tier. And what you can see here is that every 5 tiers there is an extreme jump in monster HP. So for example, tier 5 has double the HP of a tier 4, tier 10 has 70% more of a tier 9, and so on. And you see here that there's this huge jump at the end for tier 25. So I guess the devs wanted to give like this extra challenge at the end to make sure no one will beat it. But well, here we are. And in the end, it seems like a really weird system. Like if you compare this to, for example, the Diablo 3 Greater Rifts, that worked just way better, I think, where every tier had the same 17% scaling multiplicatively compared to the previous tier, so you always know what you got. But here, first of all, most people don't even know about this graph. And second of all, I don't see why every 5 tiers there should be like a certain jump. There's no like extra jump in the rewards that you can acquire, for example. So you just kind of bait people into going to certain tiers without the knowledge of those tiers being extremely hard compared to the previous one. So what people that did know this actually did is they just farmed tier 4 or tier 9 or tier 14 or tier 19, and they always try to stay away from those increments of 5. So this is a very unintuitive system, and I don't like it at all. I think every tier should have the same scaling, and most importantly, there should be more tiers so that the scaling is like spread out a bit. Because what happens right now is that people, they progress to, let's say, tier 9, and, that's relatively easy. Most builds can do that without much trouble. And then you go to tier 10, and tier 10 suddenly is like a brick wall. And the same happens again on tier 15, the same happens again on tier 20. And especially with those tiers also having the achievements tied to them, people might be motivated to push and try to get those achievements, try to get that title, or for something like that, and then they hit that brick wall. And it feels really bad, I think. I think just like, pushing tier by tier would be way more interesting, because with a shorter range or like a smaller scaling number per tier without these like insane jumps every five tiers, and there would be more of a reason to kind of keep trying, go for the next level and then maybe go for the next level after that. But right now you can only ever do that if you have successfully beaten one of those 5-tier increments. And then you can maybe try the 16, and then maybe try the 17, and then maybe try the 18. But for example, if you barely beat the 15, you already know you have 0 chance of ever beating the 20. So that is like definitely one of those issues, I think, that are present here. My second point is the group play. So I've not really done that at all. So I kind of pride myself in solo grinding the glyph on my hardcore rogue all the way to level 50, which I'm going to get into in a second as well. And I didn't have any like rotations, I didn't reach any XP and all that stuff. But obviously it's an extremely stupid system the way this works right now, and that needs to be changed for the future. That should have been changed in Nightmare Dungeons already, but in Nightmare Dungeons I guess it was never really much of a problem of people like leeching completion and leeching Glyph XP. While you can do exactly the same thing in Nightmare Dungeons, no one really cares, I guess. But in a game mode like this we do care, because people that leech from other people, they can get their glyph leveled to 200, and those people that play solo, they can't. This is just how it works. And you know, people that have an insane army of, you know, blasters available, or like a, you know, a big network of blasters, they can actually, you know, get 10 times more or even more than that XP on their glyph, which is, you know, way out of control in terms of the balance between solo and group play. And in general, it kind of like decouples the reward from the actual gameplay, because, you know, you can just join any other party, any other player at the last moment, get the last hit on a Bloodseeker, you get your Glyph XP, you join the next guy, and do it in 30 seconds instead of like, you know, an excruciating, like, you know, 8-minute run where you die almost like 7 times. So that is obviously a problem. So the whole leeching thing and inviting at the last moment, you can even get the achievement for the tier 20 title by just getting invited at the last moment on a tier 20 run by someone else who's like strong enough to carry. So that is just like completely out of control, I think. Carries in general, you know, stuff like that should not be a thing. If you take a lesson from Diablo 3, yet again, we have learned a lot of these lessons that I'm talking about already in Diablo 3, and they were not implemented here, which is kind of a sad story. But in Diablo 3, a Greater Rift is just locked in at the start. You go in with a certain team size, you go in with a certain setup, and you cannot change it. And, well, those things have not been implemented here in Diablo 4 at all, and that led to a lot of problems, also some more that I'm going to talk about. Especially exploits. So here we have exactly what I just mean. We have the snapshotting of stats and aspects. So what a lot of classes and builds do is they equip certain items to start the run, and then you have a snapshot. If you don't know what a snapshot is, it basically means that you benefit from a certain effect after you no longer have that effect, so to say. So one example is on the barbarians, you can equip items that have damage while berserking on them, and that scales the Blood Rage legendary paragon node. And then you have a higher multiplier on your damage whenever you're berserking, and then you go into the run, and that number, whatever you had, will remain that number for the entire run, no matter what you do. And you can unequip all those items with damage while berserking, and you can equip other items with other stats. And similar with some aspects. There are certain aspects that people snapshot. For example, you have a two-handed aspect of the elements, so you get a 60% damage buff regularly. And then you have the same aspect on a one-handed slot or like a normal slot. And you just unequip that two-handed weapon after joining the run, and you will keep that double bonus. So this is obviously extremely stupid, and obviously, you know, completely skews the balance of the game. It skews the balance of the builds, and it's also tedious to do, because every single run you have to unequip those items, you have to equip them again, and so on. And there's other snapshots as well, like certain passives. For example, in the Sorg, they can run like 2 key passives because the various masteries, damage reduction snapshots. So in general, snapshotting is going to be a huge problem in the future of this game. I can already tell that. And even if Blizzard decides to lock in the item choices and the skill choices in the Abattoir of Zir, we will use these things for other things in the future now. So whenever there's going to be a super hard Uber boss again in the future, like, okay, Lilith is a joke these days, but, you know, there's going to be more bosses, and we're going to use this stuff. So in general, snapshotting needs to be fixed for this to make any sense, for, you know, challenges to exist in a game, because otherwise people are always going to find some of those weird snapshotting moments. So there needs to be something that regularly resets and like refreshes all of your aspects and your stats, and like recalculates these things with your currently equipped gear, so that this cannot be abused in and out of Abattoir of Zir. Then we have the infinite progression and the infinite time exploits. So I think infinite progression was fixed, but at the start at least that was a thing where people could just summon hydras or summon even like necromancer skellies and stuff, and they actually gave progression. So you could like spawn the Bloodseekers in like 2 minutes on a Zork or something. But I think the infinite time exploit is still not fixed. So that is the one where if you kill the last monster in exactly 10 minutes, then the timer will black out and you have infinite time for the Bloodseekers. So you can kind of just like, kill them in half an hour if you want. Apparently that is still in the game. And then I talked about the swapping skills and items. So in general, this should not be a thing. It also unfairly benefits PC players more than console players with the swapping of skills. It also, incentivizes people to make macros and, for example, like swap like half the build around. Like you can go really crazy. You can like swap, multiple skills. You can even swap Paragon nodes at the start of a run or even when the Bloodseekers spawn. And all of that is just like, first of all, not really feasible with a controller in a decent amount of time. And second of all, it can be cheated with macros on top of that. And it's just kind of stupid, So let's remove that entirely, hopefully. Then we have the rewards. So that's my fourth big point here. The only reward for doing Abattoir of Zir outside of getting the title is the Glyph. And the Glyph is just extremely boring. Like, no one likes leveling Glyph, let's be real. And I do understand that this is probably a bit better of a solution than legendary gem leveling in Diablo 3, where you had the chance to fail and was kind of frustrating, and the Glyph XP is supposed to solve that, I imagine. Which is fine, but for Abattoir of Zir in particular, I think the Glyph was kind of a mistake. I think that the Glyph made it less interesting than it could have been, because now what we have is we have this unofficial Maxwell leaderboard, for example, where we try to like just gauge like the different performance of builds and players, and well, a lot of the top ranks are just due to the high level Glyph that some people have. There are some ranks up there that are really good, even with a low level Glyph and stuff like that. But generally what happens is we're back to like the D3 phenomenon, where you grind more, you get a better rank, which is generally not a bad concept. However, in this case, I talked about the group carries and the leeching of XP. Like, it completely ruins this kind of like comparison between players and comparison between builds, because the grind is way too long. It's effectively an infinite grind for solo players and even an extreme grind for group players. And it just kind of like, stretches everything out way too much, I think. So if the grind was way shorter, let's say level 50 TOB Glyph was the end, that would be, feasible, like reasonably achievable for a solo player in, a few dozen hours or something like that. I have done that grind and it wasn't too crazy, but the fact that it goes on and on and on, and, like the last levels, they take insane amounts of time. And if you don't do this group leeching strat, then you have no chance of completing this grind. So I think in general, the Glyph could have just been removed entirely, or maybe been like a way shorter of a grind to be way more interesting, because there needs to be an end to the grind. So what happens is right now that, you just play more, you get stronger, and this is exactly what we had in Diablo 3, and it's not fun. I think Diablo 3 Paragons are generally universally disliked, especially for the people that really care about the game, that are a bit more try-hard, a bit more competitive. The Diablo 3 Paragon system is effectively the Tears of Blood Glyph. And we play Diablo 4 because we have finite progression. This is also something that the developers talked about. Finite progression, finite character power. And this has kind of been reversed with the Glyph. There is no finite power progression anymore, at least for 99.99% of players. And that is a bit of a problem. I think what would have been way more interesting is, for example, if there was a chance to get Uber Uniques in Abattoir of Zir, for those people that don't really have them. So that could have been a reward on its own that would have maybe scale up with the tier that you're doing. So you have like a small chance at tier 1 and it kind of goes higher and higher. And that would have given you something to look forward to, something of an alternative to the Duriel grind that is also just getting kind of boring at this point, I guess, for most people. And it would give you like maybe this hype moment where like, man, now you just found this one last item that you really needed for your build, this kind of big drop that happens. Right now, the loot is just kind of like whatever. I mean, I understand you're supposed to go into Abattoir of Zir with basically, your entire character already completed, but not everyone has a luxury. Not everyone has all of the uber uniques that they want. Not everyone has the perfect gear when they go in there, and that would have been a bit of a more exciting avenue to explore, I think. And then lastly, I wonder if the rewards are actually needed at all. So the reason why I have this point here is because I see that Abattoir of Zir could be something way more interesting than it is right now if it was actually mostly a build contest and a skill, like a player contest. So if there was actually no reason to go in there and, you know, like farm this thing all day long, I think it could be way more interesting if this was like literally just a leaderboard mode, for example, or it doesn't even have to have leaderboards necessarily. It could also just be a measure for your build, so to say. So especially in a world where, for example, we don't have this snapshotting and we don't have like item swaps and skill swaps, you could make a build and you can just like try it out and see how far you can go to kind of get a benchmark for that build. And that could literally be the purpose of this system, I think. I think that Abattoir of Zir on its own is too ubiquitous. It's like, you know, the only thing we can do right now. So that's also something I have here in 0.6. There's nothing else to do once you are ready for Abattoir of Zir. And you're supposed to grind out this glyph for like, you know, hundreds of hours basically. And then you push slightly higher and then you grind more of the glyph and you push slightly higher again. And it kind of like devalues the rest of the game. And well, again, Diablo 3 example, we did exactly that back then. Blizzard kept buffing everything, they kept forcing us into greater rifts, and these days, greater rifts is the only thing you do. Like 99% of the time you do greater rifts. And effectively, what I fear this will lead to is that in Diablo 4, 99% of the time what we do and what we care about is going to be Abattoir of Zir, or whatever system is going to replace Abattoir in the future. And I think that is kind of a problem. I think that this like kind of like high-end scaling content just devalues all other content way too much. There is a lot of diversity in the content that we have in the game, and it can be improved even further with, you know, like more different types of content like Helltide or Bloodtide or whatever. And all of that just becomes extremely irrelevant extremely fast. So I kind of fear that we're moving in that direction, and I don't really want that. I think that Abattoir of Zir being something that doesn't necessarily give you anything, but just allows you to like, you know, bash your head against the wall, try out your build, try to get better at the game. You know, it's actually a huge learning experience in Abattoir of Zir. You know, you learn how to play around elite affixes, you learn how to play around monsters, about their special abilities and all that stuff. It was actually a huge improvement for me in my gameplay, doing so much of Abattoir of Zir pushing and grinding. But ultimately, I think it just becomes too much of a chore. It's like not really fun for a lot of people. And it's like, yeah, too much of the focus of the endgame currently. So this is mostly what I was getting at here. And I think maybe there doesn't need to be a reward really, or maybe there just needs to be like no special reward. For example, maybe you can still find those Ubers when you run it, but you know, at a maybe slightly lower rate than farming Duriel, for example. And, you know, there doesn't need to be like a certain glyph that you can only level there. It could be just, you know, general rewards that you get anyway. Maybe, you know, something cool like this. And it could be fun on its own. Now, my fifth point here is the build diversity. Because of the scaling of rewards currently, at least with the glyph levels, people obviously go for the best performing build. And this is like very obvious here when you look at the leaderboards. It's all barbs with a few sorks sprinkled in. And this is basically it here. You see, if you look at this, there's barbarians everywhere. And it kind of makes sense. People want to have the path of least resistance. People don't like to challenge themselves too much when they don't have to. And in this case, where you also want to grind out the glyph, it just goes way faster playing a barbarian. Now, the glyph is character bound, so that is definitely a huge advantage here. So if you want to push on a rogue, if you want to push as a necro, you have to play a rogue, you have to play a necro, or you leech from other people. I guess that's an option. The point remains is that people gravitate towards the best builds because of the reward. If there was no real reward attached to this, then people would not necessarily do that much. People would not necessarily not play that much Barbarian, but I think there would be at least less of a reason to, so people actually get to explore this content with different builds and maybe try to challenge themselves and maybe pride themselves in being like, you know, one of the top, you know, Rain of Arrows rogues or one of the top Charged Bolt Zorks or whatever, you know, these kind of like weird builds. out there. In Diablo 3, this has worked really well. In Diablo 3, there are these set leaderboards for every single build. So every class has 6 separate official leaderboards in the game, where effectively you can compete on builds of varying power. And it doesn't really matter that a certain build is stronger than the other build, because they all have their own leaderboard. And especially if that ever becomes a thing with leaderboards and stuff like that, I think that a reduction in the rewards is going to be way more effective to actually get people to play different builds, compared to now where everyone is playing Bard basically and a few Sorks. This is just a general problem of especially like the more Western player base gravitating towards the best builds. That's just how it works, I guess. You know, the meta exists and people want to play that. But if there's less of a reason to do that, then people could have more fun with the builds they actually want to play. I talked about the Abattoir of Zir's role in the endgame and the only challenge in the game. I guess that's a general problem with the game right now. The game is just too easy across the board. I understand a lot of people will also disagree with this, but the fact is the game has become extremely easy in Season 2 compared to Season 1 and especially compared to Season 0. And we don't really have anything that really challenges you if you kind of know what you're doing. Many builds can just easily crush D100 Nightmare Dungeons. Pretty much every build can do that basically these days. And that is not necessarily a problem, but the problem more is that there's nothing to really challenge yourself outside of Abattoir of Zir. And especially with Abattoir of Zir leaving in Season 3, we're gonna be back to that like no challenge moment again. So that is kind of sad. And I think there should be more challenges, you know, there should be more stuff like the old Uberlative. There should be, you know, maybe other like interesting stuff to do that is actually difficult in other ways besides scaling up the damage and health of monsters, for example, or so. But right now, yeah, it's like the only thing we can really do once you have kind of min-maxed your character. And that's kind of sad. And it also trivializes everything else, as I mentioned. And then there's also the sigil cost. So one thing that also happened to me, to other players, is the sigil cost was extremely high at the start, and people ran out of sigils really fast, and then they had to grind like thousands of sigil powder just to like do like 1 or 2 attempts again or something of like a push tier. That was changed, and sigils are way cheaper now, but it still has kind of the same problem that you're gonna have like a limited amount of tries, and if you don't mega grind out the glyph, especially in groups, you don't have enough sigil powder to really do like a big push later on. So even after like a few dozen hours of grinding, I could craft like 100 something, maybe 200 sigils or so. And well, if you fail regularly, then you run out of those sigils really fast. And that was kind of bad because it kind of like disincentivizes you from like really trying. Like even if you want to push higher, if you want to beat that next tier, then you kind of just get locked out of it at some point and you get out of sigil powder. And you have to go back to Nightmare Dungeons now to try to grind some sigil powder again, which just feels kind of terrible when your character is just so overpowered for Nightmare Dungeons at that point. And it was kind of like weird to have a cost at all. I mean, I understand there needs to be maybe a cost because of the Glyph XP and because of the loot you get and stuff like that. But especially for like a kind of like a pushing scenario where you want to try to beat your next, you know, best high score or something, the sigil cost was kind of a problem. So this was like too slow to farm even with the nerfs, I think. Next point, we have the Taste of Blood Glyph. I talked about this earlier as well. So it's basically just a defeat Paragon in disguise. I don't think I have to go much into this, but I just want to restate this. Like, I don't think anyone really wants Paragons again. There were also some people that, you know, mentioned that they would like the glyph to be account-wide even, like, you know, to apply to all of your characters. And then we're literally back to Diablo 3 Paragons. And I think this is a case of you think you do, but you don't. Like, I don't think you want this. I don't think anyone wants this, because we're just going to do rat runs again in Diablo 4, basically. Like, you play a certain class that is like the most effective at grinding that glyph, especially in groups, I guess. And you do that for like a few hundred hours, and then eventually you play your main class that you actually want to play, your main build that you actually want to play, you know, for a little bit, just because it's way more efficient to grind out the glyph on another class, on another build. And that is obviously a really stupid system. That should not be the case. And I'm very happy that so far we did not have anything like it in Diablo 4. And I really sincerely hope that we're never gonna get anything like Diablo 3 Paragons in the future in Diablo 4. So let me just like say that again. Okay, point 8 is the boss fights. So the Bloodseekers, I think were generally a massive improvement over just having like a regular dungeon boss. Back when I was at BlizzCon, I actually went to the Blizzard headquarters and I tried out Abattoir of Zir a bit ahead of time. And that was actually one of the big points of feedback I gave back then. Like the boss fights were just boring. You know, bosses in general in Diablo 4 are kind of badly designed, I would say, and extremely boring fights. And yeah, there needed to be something to spice it up. And the Bloodseekers have definitely spiced it up. So I think that was generally a good move, but there are some problems with that. Number one is when they spawn, they usually spawn all together and they immediately blast you with a bunch of, you know, different abilities and different affixes. And for most people, the fight ends exactly there, right at the start. So the Bloodseeker spawn, you don't have your buffs up, and you die instantly. Because a lot of builds rely on, you know, getting up close, or rely on getting up the bleed, rely on getting up the disobedience stacks. There are a lot of conditional damage reduction effects in the game that builds rely on to have a chance to survive Abattoir of Zir at all. And especially at the start of the fight, most people just die instantly. And, well, some builds have easier ways than others to like mitigate that problem and kind of get their buffs up, and then it's kind of like a stable fight. But you can sometimes still get these insane damage spikes because there's like, you know, the teleport from the Berserk that's just like completely overtuned, the frozen orbs that they throw, the landslide from the Druid that hits you randomly when your disobedience is down and one-shots you. A bunch of stuff like that, basically. So I think the Bloodseekers in general were a bit overtuned, which is fine for like the overworld content, but I think they could have had like maybe a bit of like a separate treatment in Abattoir of Zir directly because of the extreme scaling there. Another problem is that the Bloodseekers can be split up, which is kind of like the only way for many builds to actually defeat them at all, to have like not die instantly. But ultimately, I think they should have been balanced in a way where they all come together no matter what, but they are maybe a bit easier. And like this, you could have had this like kind of like 1v3 encounter, and it would have been like much more dynamic for a lot of builds instead of doing this like 1v1 and then 1v1 again and then 1v1 again. And that kind of made it somewhat boring in some cases. But yeah, with better scaling and better min-maxing of how hard they are, I think could have been a bit more interesting. And lastly, these Bloodseekers just take too long anyway. So while they're not dungeon bosses that could effectively not be beaten for many builds on like tier 25 or tier 24 or any of those high tiers, Bloodseekers have much less HP, they can be crowd controlled, so you get off your damage modifiers, etc. Versus bosses where you have to stagger them and you have like very low uptime of some of those modifiers, and some builds will suffer heavily against them. I think the fights are generally still too long on the higher tiers. What happens is that when you actually try to push like to like a new personal best, you try to get like a good map where you have, you know, good distribution of monsters, a good monster type, you have like many elites in there, and you kind of like artificially go a bit higher by trying more and by trying to get a bit better map. But what happens is that a lot of builds are really good at doing AoE damage, or they even scale with the amount of targets and just, you know, go higher and higher tiers quite easily. But then comes the boss fight where you can't benefit from those scaling mechanisms, and you have like, you know, a 5-minute encounter against the Bloodseekers. And that is just way too long. That's like literally half the timer, and that happens on quite a bunch of builds, honestly. So when you look at this encounter here, for example, this was my Rogue tier 20 clear, where I had like almost 4 minutes left and I spawned the Bloodseekers, and then I cleared it with like 10 seconds left or something like that, or 20 seconds. And, you know, first of all, I did a split here that I talked about earlier, and then I did this 1v1. And okay, not every build does the 1v1 thing, but in general, I think these Bloodseekers just live too long. And compared to the normal monsters in Abattoir of Zir, I think they should have, you know, separate scaling. This is something I proposed like many years ago already in Diablo 3, but it wasn't done there. Instead, we got the Bane of the Stricken, and I don't really want the Bane of the Stricken again, but I think that the bosses in particular, or the single target encounters in particular, could maybe benefit from like a slightly reduced HP scaling, so that it kind of like stays in line with the time that you spend in the run, so that, you know, the monster or like the boss HP just doesn't get out of control. So the Bloodseekers being like, you know, just beefed up elites was kind of a solution to that already, but again, they do live a long time on those high tiers, and it just doesn't feel that fun, I think. let's get to point number 9, which is RNG. So this is also mostly relevant for trying to push to a new personal best, to try to get like a new like best result or something like that. But there are 3 main factors. One is the monsters, one is the maps, and one is the Bloodseekers. So they are kind of like relevant in that order as well. So there are certain monster types that are massively better to try to push on than other monster types. A while ago I made a tier list as well. There's like 1 or 2 really good monster types, like the skellies and the spiders, which is like by far the best, and basically most of the top clears are done on this monster type. There's also like the skellies and the drowned that are pretty good, and there's like different variations of those spiders. And then there's a bunch of like kind of like mediocre monster types that for some builds are pretty decent, but for most builds not really. And then there's like a lot of really crazy trash that uses like insta-leave basically. And you can see this here as well. So when I was pushing, I was basically only going for skellies and spiders, which had like really high density, which, well, in my case with this Pen RF build was also due to the density scaling of this build, which is relatively high. But in general, some monster types are just way easier than others and just give you way more progress than others on top of that. And while this is fine for like, you know, the rest of the game, in Abattoir of Zir in particular, I think it was way too imbalanced, just like mixing up those different monster types, like stuff like the vampires together with the snakes. Like the snakes stun you all the time unless you're on Metamorphosis, and then the vampires just go immune all the time, and you have to defeat those bloodborns, and those bloodborns are so tanky that by the time you defeat one, there's already the next one, so you can basically never kill some of those packs. Like stuff like this is just like way out of control here. And I think that could definitely be balanced out a bit more by, you know, like adding a few more of like these more dangerous monsters in like the easy monster types, and a few more of those better monsters in the bad monster types or something like that. I think there was not really any balancing done here, and it shows. And the same for the maps as well. There are some pretty good maps. There's like the temple, there's the cathedral, the mallwood, you know, some of those like big open maps where you can like make large pulls easily, and you can kind of like pull from multiple sides. This is obviously way more beneficial than some of those close quarter maps. Immortal Emanation, like Old Stones, like these kind of like, you know, barracks maps. You just don't really have space to kite enemies around sometimes. It's not as bad with the maps as it is with the monsters, but the maps do matter quite a bit. And in general, it kind of like made the pushing like very RNG heavy. And combined with the sigil cost, you could run out of sigil powder really fast to actually do it. So I can give you my example. When I was pushing my tier 20 on the rogue, I opened, I think, nearly 200 sigils, and out of those I played like 7 or 8 or something like that, which were the skellies and spiders. And then I had to get lucky to not get the cold spiders, because they are basically unplayable. They're like really dangerous as well. There's like the red spiders, the poison spiders, and the cold spiders. But the cold spiders I just can't survive, so I didn't play those. But yeah, like I played like maybe 5% or so of the maps that I actually opened, and then eventually I cleared one of them. So this is how my push went, and I think this is pretty similar for most of the other like high-end pushes. So you have a lot of attempts to even try to get the right monster type, and then you have to try to get a decent map, and then you have to try to get like many of those elite packs together so that you get a lot of progression, and then you also have to get lucky with the Bloodseekers. And, you know, for some builds, you know, it's really important to stack out those Bloodseekers. Not so much in my case here, because I was 1v1ing them, but, you know, Barbs, they want to do like 1v3 against the Bloodseekers. They want to have no Sorks that just teleport away from them all the time. You know, Necromancers, if you don't have all the Bloodseekers stacked with Infinimus, you do 0 damage if they don't die all at the same time and they're stacked all the time. So there's a lot of RNG with the affixes, with how much damage they deal to you, with which Bloodseekers you spawned. The Sorks were just overtuned in general. So you, even after doing all this other stuff to try to get there, you could still easily fail just the moment the boss spawns. So that is just a bit too much. And I think there needed to be a bit more like balancing of the Bloodseekers as well. And lastly, my last point here, the lags. So I guess this is mostly a result of monsters being extremely tanky, and some builds just producing a lot of extra hits. But I can show this here right now, how this looks, for example, on my Penshot Rogue. So when I play Penshot and I make a large pull, especially if there's champions like that in there that, you know, actually protect the other monsters, this can get way out of control. But even like relatively small scale pulls here, or like medium sized pulls like this one, you can lag out very easily on some builds. I guess the worst is the Storks, like Ball Lighting, I think literally doesn't even play this monster type here, because they would just lag out instantly. But this is probably the next most laggy build. But there's other candidates, like Bloodlands can be kind of laggy in those pulls. Maybe some other like dot builds or so, or some other stuff that hits a lot. But you can see here, like I'm literally freezing for like half a minute in this pull. And this is with me having really high damage output and basically just evaporating half this pull in one single shot. But the game just kind of like can't handle it. And I think this is a problem that will persist no matter what if we ever get such a like high-end game mode again. And I don't know what can be done about this from the dev side, but something needs to be done here. So either some of those builds need to be retuned so that you don't hit like 100 times on 100 targets, which, you know, obviously will lead to lags. Or, for example, the progression required could be increased so that, you know, we just have to go through Abattoir of Zir faster, doing smaller pulls and killing them quicker. So it kind of like gets closer and closer to like more of a speed farming scenario and less of like a, you know, bash your head against the wall and shoot into a pack like 200 times to kill them kind of scenario. And in that case, you know, I wouldn't have to make these large pulls, or I wouldn't have time to make these large pulls, and the lag issue would also be solved slightly at least. So this is just something, at least for the devs, to keep in mind, something for maybe the class design as well to fix, or maybe whenever Abattoir of Zir is like future game mode, I think there needs to be some tweaking with, you know, the density, with how much HP monsters can actually have and so on, so that we can prevent this. But yeah, those were all of the points that I wanted to talk about here in my Abattoir of Zir feedback video. Let me know if I missed anything. I try to kind of go through all of the main points and discuss them with enough detail so that I can explain what's going on. But if there was anything left that I didn't mention here, then feel free to leave it in the comments. I hope that we're gonna get the message out there for Blizzard to you know, improve the system, make something way better and way cooler when the time comes. I guess in Season 4 or Season 5 or whenever we might get something like this again. I'm definitely looking forward to like more pushing content, more challenging content, and I'm not sad that we got Abattoir of Zir. Like, I still have to appreciate that we got this in the first place. I think it was good that Blizzard made Abattoir of Zir. It definitely showed a lot of the problems that the game has, a lot of problems that can arise with such a game mode, and I can only hope that Blizzard is gonna take notes here and actually fix all of that stuff for whenever they bring it back, basically. But we have to see that, you know, this was just kind of like some, you know, probably pretty spontaneous, I don't know, like mid-season event, basically. And for that, I think it was a relatively successful event. Even with what I said at the start of a lot of people not liking it, etc. At the very least, I think it gave the devs a huge learning experience. And let's hope that they make something good out of it. So this is what I have to share here. Hope you enjoyed this video here. And let's see what comes out of it. See you guys next time.